head today is there on behalf of the Committee of Forestry and Wildlife on the Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources in Kazakhstan. When we established the partnership in 2006, which is named Altyn Dala Conservation Initiatives. So this initiative is primary to conserve and restore the grasslands in Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan retains the biggest scale grassland ecosystem in the world. And one of the primary focus when the initiative has been started a long time ago was to recovering of the saiga antelope as the one keystone species for the grassland ecosystem, and also to work with other solutions to reintroduce some wild ungulates like its Asiatic ass, and also to bring back the wild horses to Kazakhstan as a Przevalsky horse. And also, like, being established in the recovery in wild ungulates was not only the focus of the how we think the grasslands can be sustained. Most important is to bring some sustainable agriculture approaches, which is actually Kazakhstan, an historical nomad country, used to manage before, and within the new technology, something that can be bring and developed further. And I think those are main direction about how we can bring this grazing balance to the step back to sustain functional of the grasslands for the climate resilience in the regional and the globe as whole.
Thank you. And Maddie, let me
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and congratulations on the Altyn Dala Award. My name is Madhu Rao, and I am the chair of IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas. I'm also a senior advisor to the Wildlife Conservation Society. My interest in grasslands is linked to the fact that along with freshwater ecosystems, it's one of the most neglected ecosystems in the world. And as we look towards the recovery of ecosystems, we really need to pay extra attention to grasslands. So that's where my interest comes.
Thanks, Maddie. And given that steppe grasslands, they cover, they're a very cross-boundary ecosystem. From your perspective of these international commitments and conferences, how do you see the protection of steppe grasslands better integrated in multinational agreements and collaboration?
Yeah, so I think the big intersection and synergy that we see at this COP is the intersection and synergy between biodiversity and climate, and between the two big policy instruments, right? The Global Biodiversity Framework looks at many targets, but goal A of the Global Biodiversity Framework seeks to increase ecological integrity through protection, restoration, and management of ecosystems. And within goal A, we've got target 3, which looks at protecting and conserving at least 30% of the world's ecosystems. So I think grasslands, as for a country like Kazakhstan, I think protecting grasslands where you can and restoring grasslands where possible can really go a long way in achieving both targets, the biodiversity target 3, as well as the climate target. Because many people, as we all know, seem to overlook the fact that in the Paris Agreement, Article 5.1 of the Paris Agreement seeks to conserve sinks and reservoirs of carbon. And that's really relevant to countries like Kazakhstan, but also gives you an opportunity to target climate finance for protection of nature.
Thank you. And Simon, as an expert in soil mechanisms, could you discuss what happens in a grassland system that is rich in biodiversity compared to one which is very degraded, in terms of the actual soil sequestration and the different factors which influence that?
Yes, gladly. So in a functional grassland, and I think always for reference, we can acknowledge that today's grain baskets of the world. So our most agriculturally productive areas are on former grasslands, because those grasslands build the soil fertility which until today feeds humanity, which fed the Romans. And the grassland ecosystem is able to facilitate this great soil buildup and the carbon buildup, which we are just fully learning, because we have a scientific revolution in soil health, really, in soil science, and understand now much better how grasslands are so great at building soil. So we need optimized plant biodiversity in grasslands, and also optimized with animal biodiversity. And grasslands are actually, I like to say, the most cooperative biomes or ecosystems, because grasses allow themselves to be bitten on top, and below ground, which is actually building the soil, their roots give a lot of exudates. So grasslands have very fine roots in comparison, for example, with trees which have woody roots, and they share large parts of the carbon that they facilitate, that they sequester with their above ground biomass through photosynthesis to the soil life below the ground. And then we can also understand that the grazing management is decisive for the functionality of the grassland, because grasses, like all plants, basically grow in an S curve. Only grasses grow very quickly, so this is mostly about a 30-day ratio if we have enough water. And so there's an exponential growth rate. And at this growth rate, the grasses assimilate the most carbon and share the most carbon with the soil life and build the soil health. So if we manage a natural ecosystem through the predators and the large herds, we actually can optimize the photosynthesis growth in this optimal exponential period, which is enabling grasslands to do a lot of photosynthesis, of which a lot of the biomass is shared with the below ground life, which is building soil carbon.
Thank you.
Genevieve, can I also add to this?
Yeah.
There was a research done in Kazakhstan, and the publication is exist. And this was a really great graphics show like how the scale of the pastures in decreasing in Kazakhstan, and on the same time the scale of the steppe fires is decreasing in the parallel of this. And I think it's happening significantly after the Soviet Union was broken, and the number of livestock is decreased significantly in Kazakhstan. It was a great expansion of the steppe fire. But actually, we now can observe the different situation, the positive trend that the steppe fire is now decreasing, comparable of increases of number of the livestock. But I think the question with the livestock, domestic stock, the domestic animals, that we need to think about how we can bring this historical approach of the sustainable and the balanced use of the different pastures, because the problem is that the people, they still use the pastures which is close to the villages and the rural areas, and they also overgrazing, where we still have the pressure on these lands, but there is still a problem of undergrazing in the distance pasture lands. Yeah.
Thanks, Vera. That's really interesting, and it leads me to think you both mentioned the importance of balancing the needs of steppe ecosystems, including wildlife and pastoral domestic grazers. And Maddie, I'm wondering from your perspective, because as the head of the Commission on Protected Areas have traditionally excluded human use of landscapes. And I know you're very involved in the evolving nature of OECMs, which can include sustainable land management practices. And these international commitments happen at a very high level, often without the inclusion of people on the ground who manage these landscapes. So my question is, how can local pastoral communities become more involved in decisions around sustainable land management through, for example, OECMs and other mechanisms?
Thanks. Great question. So I think I just want to clarify that protected areas actually have 6 management categories, and only 2 of the 6 management categories are strictly protected, protection of nature, strict protection of nature. So the remaining 4 categories are open for use, but for sustainable use. So that's the first clarification I want to make. I think OECMs, which are other effective area-based conservation measures, offer a huge opportunity to expand the area that we conserve to achieve the target of 30%. And OECMs, so communities can actually be the stewards of OECMs. So OECMs have clear criteria. The Commission has developed guidance on how you recognize OECMs. The clear criteria include the fact that the communities who own and manage the land have to be willing, so there has to be free, prior, informed consent. The area has to have biodiversity significance. The area has to have strong management and governance processes in place that are actively reducing the threats. And the site has to achieve biodiversity conservation in the long term. So the one point I want to make is that OECMs are recognized by the CBD within Target 3. Target 3 is within Goal A, and the purpose and the overall objective is biodiversity conservation. So you can have use as long as the use doesn't diminish the biodiversity value of the area. But what everybody forgets is that there is Target 10 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which allows for sustainable use. So you could have commercial use of grasslands, for example. I mean, high levels of grazing, but they would belong to Target 10 because that's high intensity grazing of with the objective of maintaining biodiversity. Then they could be recognized as OECMs if they fulfill all the other criteria. Or they could actually be protected areas. As I said, there are governance categories of protected areas, which allows for complete ownership and governance by local communities.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask, I guess, on that, it's really critical if you are to have a system which balances domestic grazing with wild grazers, to understand the carrying capacity of a landscape to accommodate both types of grazers, and to understand the kind of optimal rotation to enable grasslands to recover at that peak time in the season. And I'm wondering whether you've looked at this in Germany, kind of optimal multi-use systems in grasslands, and how to measure that and monitor it over time, to kind of identify the effectiveness of this kind of integrated sustainable management program.
Yeah, I think, of course, it's very context specific, So in Germany, we don't have any wild grazers really anymore. Maybe some deers come from the forest, but not like here. Then in Namibia, again, it's different. For example, they also have a lot of wild grazers. And I think it's then, of course, with the land users in very close collaboration on their needs and the management. I think what the kind of switch of understanding, and that would also be a question of me to you, because I'm not so knowledgeable in how do we define low intensity and high intensity. I think we have to make a general switch through this quickly evolving new scientific understandings also, not only understand it in animal numbers, but particularly in grazing management. So how long does the grass have time to recover exactly to do this switch, because if we graze too low, of course, the photosynthetic capacities of the plants are too low and it dries out much quicker. We don't have the moisture capacity to hold the water. I think in general, we can then see if local land users use only one kind of animals or maybe two. So I think this multi-species grazing is just as a plant diversity for the grassland ecosystems, super important. And then we can see what the local land users are using, if they have really working only with one kind of animals, and we can already start to analyze what is the carrying capacity in the terms of what time does the land have to recover after the grazing impact. So try to think a little bit. I think it's giving a lot of positive options for this integration of wild grazers and commercial grazers for also, I mean, building the commercial viability for the grasslands. I think that's critical also in our times. We cannot always rely on conservation money coming in, but we need to build economic systems that can sustain the grasslands in the local economy.
Thank you. And, you know, we know that one of Kazakhstan's most important export is domestic livestock rearing. And Vera is also here speaking on behalf of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Ecology. And perhaps, Vera, you could speak more to some of the policies coming out of Kazakhstan now, which focus on sustainable livestock management planning to, you know, ensure that this important export continues to thrive while accounting for the ecological importance of the landscape.
Yeah, I think like that, while the importance of the grassland ecosystems for the carbon sequestration is very much recognized on the global level, and Kazakhstan is also trying to really develop the internal policy, which would be emphasized and develop internal mitigation measures to improve sustainable use of this ecosystem. I think one of the points would be to highlight that national determination contribution, which was like quite recently was approved. It very much highlight the importance of the improving the current system of the grassland management. And we even do have a very specific law about the pasture management, and it still have many gaps and it still need to be improved. And the country is still to learning. And I think some of the examples from the neighboring countries as a Kyrgyzstan, I think they are really mainstream in this direction of the pasture management with involvement of local communities. And also, I think to look for the wildlife animals is important to mention that we are in the process to develop national biodiversity strategy, and the latest draft was developed in 2019, and now it's the goal to review and see how the sustainable agriculture approaches would be integrated to the biodiversity plan is the first point. And of course, the second point is to think about, okay, like recovering of the wild ungulates. And I think your points about to create sustainable economical approach, I think it's exactly about that Kazakhstan on the way to develop sustainable use of the Saiga antelope. And because the recovering was very successfully, we now have around 2 million animals in the country. And it's a really economical value species, not only because of the meat, but also about the potential of the trading of the Saiga horns. And this is also a good opportunity to bring economical value of the wild grazer for the local people and the country as a whole. And I think also important maybe for us as a country to use the opportunity, because Kazakhstan in February joined the High Ambition Coalition 30 by 30 campaign, and thinking about like how the development of OECMs in Kazakhstan, probably based on the quite developed network of the hunting areas, can be used to protect the grassland ecosystem as well. Yeah, I think this is what probably is important to highlight from the perspective of the national policies.
Thank you. And I'm thinking now about the role of protected areas and OECMs in this. And as we know, Kazakhstan is one of the most vulnerable countries to desertification and the other impacts of climate change. And the climate of Kazakhstan is changing quite dramatically, quite quickly. And Madhu, I'm interested to hear whether developments have been made to establish adaptive protected areas which can move depending on where wildlife is moving. So in Kazakhstan, for example, it's very likely that Saiga will start to find new grounds as the southern desert part becomes much hotter. And perhaps the kind of traditional system of protected areas, which are very static, might have to change to accommodate that. And we are seeing ecological corridors being established in Kazakhstan, which can accommodate the migratory nature of Saiga. But I'm wondering whether you know of any examples elsewhere in the world where this adaptive protected area management is happening, where it can even move based on where the wildlife is migrating.
Yeah, so I think actually it's a very pertinent question because there was a side event on connectivity yesterday, and that is really the key because connectivity is now considered a nature-based solutions because that's going to be essential for large-scale area-based conservation because ecosystems are going to move and protected areas are going to, the boundaries are going to shift. So it's essential that we use a system of protected areas and OECMs that are connected through corridors, ecological corridors, that would allow the migration of ecosystems and species. So there's a lot of work being done around establishing corridors. There's one country in Africa, Tanzania, which has actually enacted a law to recognize ecological corridors in their law. So they now have identified, I think, almost 80 ecological corridors in their country, and they are going to protect these ecological corridors. So I think looking at corridors as being critically important, not just for carbon, not just for biodiversity, but also for carbon. So that's the key to ensuring that we have adaptation by species to changing ecosystems.
Thank you. And as you said, it is important to focus on the carbon benefits of creating these frameworks for protecting, especially migratory species and ecosystems. And I'd like to ask as you know, the soil science evolved much later than the science surrounding forest restoration. So we've seen, REDD+ programs developed over the last 20 years really successfully, but those programs haven't quite caught up yet within grasslands. And I'd like to ask if you could discuss some of the challenges in measuring the carbon benefits of steppe ecosystem restoration in terms of the verification, monitoring the organic carbon stocks in the soil, and then measuring those changes over time, and what the kind of latest methodologies are in doing that, if you can. Sorry, it's a tricky question.
Yes, I can. I think we have, the voluntary carbon markets have kind of burped up a lot of methodologies and technologies, and we are doing very, very quick advances in using satellite data with cost-efficient soil probes for validation and AI and kind of not only modeling, but also prospecting the soil organic carbon stocks and their development. For example, INRA, the French institute, is doing quite phenomenal work in that direction, and that can be quite cost efficiently done. So I think that's quite advanced if we haven't done this for grasslands as much as for the forests in REDD+ yet. So now we can do it much more cost efficiently and more robustly than before. I think if I can mention one kind of problem that's also here in the NDC discussions popping up, and that will also, we discussed it before, will be popping up if we are talking about the climate benefits of grasslands is the discussion, okay, we have soil organic carbon, maybe conservation of that soil organic carbon, maybe even build-up, which will also be more difficult if we have very strong climate impacts in Kazakhstan, for example. But then the question always arises, okay, but what is about the methane emissions of the herbivores? And I think there also we are making a lot of scientific advances which are not yet introduced in our NDC assumptions, for example. So both hydroxyl oxidation for breaking down methane, as well as methane-eating soil bacteria, basically. Those are not recognized yet. And those two functions are completely different in naturally and biodiversity enhancing stewarded grassland ecosystems than, for example, in commercially used grasslands in, let's say, Western agricultural ecosystems where we use nitrogen fertilizer and only have one grass species left. And we have now, for the first time in the NDCs, that countries with a lot of grassland can use a GWP star instead of the GWP 100, which is advancing the capacities of countries really to more fully display the greenhouse gas benefits of grasslands, of their conservation and their stewarding for maybe even regeneration in the case of former degradation.
Thank you. And you've mentioned NDCs, and Kazakhstan has recently introduced grassland carbon enhancement into its NDCs, which is really great. But we're also interested in the potential of voluntary carbon markets and how that can involve local communities and empower them to act their role as stewards of the landscape. And Vera, I know you've been following some of the recently established international grassland carbon projects, which are registered under these newly established methodologies as part of the voluntary carbon market. Would you like to speak to that and its application in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, like, of course, we're very much looking for to use the opportunities for the voluntary carbon market to co-finance this large-scale restoration projects in Kazakhstan. And I think the example close to us, it can be the Mongolia, because they already have examples of registered the project for the carbon market by the Plan Viva standards. And there is a big potential. There is an ongoing process of some initiatives inside the country to develop and to apply and standards in Kazakhstan. And we also very much hope that the work that we do in Kazakhstan would be and also apply for the standards and we can register. And I think from my point of view, as you mentioned, Genevieve, I think it's getting important, and that's these voluntary markets is the good, because the 60% of the money goes to the support local communities. And I think we see this one of the real opportunity to bring economical benefits for local people. Yeah, so just the way forward for this, very much we are looking for this potential as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And as you said, Plan Viva is a really good standard because it highlights the role of local communities and ecological restoration as a co-benefit to carbon sequestration, which aligns much more closely with the work that we're doing as an ecosystem restoration initiative than other standards, which are very much focused purely on the carbon benefits without recognizing the wider network around that. So we're coming to an end. And so I'd like to invite you to share any final thoughts or comments that we haven't had a chance yet to cover in this session.
Okay, I'll go first then if everyone is looking at me. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to just put out the idea again, and I must in full honesty say I have no knowledge really on the grazers and the local people and the land use. And you said we have still this problem of overgrazing close to the land and undergrazing further away. And to my understanding, of grassland ecosystem regeneration and building of their resilience in climate change, really grazing management is completely decisive. And I think we have a lot of examples, and we can discuss later. I would be super interested to understand how this overgrazing is. So we have a lot of examples around the world where we have this integration where local people really relearn more indigenous ways of stewarding without having to become nomads again, to put it that way. And I think that's a great potential which we can leverage.
Thank you. And it would be good to hear those examples later. So please do share them.
Yeah, I think we are at a really unique point in time, and we are in a bit of a crisis. We have two crises on hand. We've got the climate crisis as well as a biodiversity crisis, and I think we at this point require a level of bold ambition by countries to really change things. I mean, we will need some transformation, and what that means for land use management, for economic agricultural sectors. I mean, we've seen in this forum the whole revolution that's going to come about for food, for agriculture, and I think we've got to start looking at transformation of agriculture and livestock in order to really be able to address these twin crises in a sort of time-sensitive way, because we've got 6 years to achieve the global biodiversity framework, and the climate change impacts are already upon us. So I think the question is, what are those really bold decisions that countries can take at this point in time to sort of, instead of going in one route, really start to take an alternative, more sustainable route?
Thank you.
Yes, Mario, I think you're right that we need the urgent actions. And I think the issue with some of the regions and the countries that, like for Kazakhstan, like it's still like the understanding that the agriculture affects biodiversity is below in some of the sectoral of the agriculture. And I think this is really important to bring this information and to share on the regional platforms, on the global platforms as in this. And it's like the back to back, like the when information from the regional level come to the country, and when the country can share about their potential to bring the knowledge, to bring the science, the new approaches to the country to test this. And I just think that thank you very much to join this to this platform to discuss this. And I think it would be good like to follow up on the more social media the information on this, that we can also highlight about like a big potential in the region for the grassland restoration, for the climate resilience, and to bring more expertise and to bring more techniques to the region to make actually from knowledge sharing to the concrete action to happen on the better in the soon time. Yeah.
Thank you, Vera. And thanks again, Simon and Madhu, for joining us today.